Good morning and welcome to the Gospel of. We are in the book of Revelation and we're coming to chapter 8. We are busy comparing history of the last 2,000 years with the book of Revelation. It's called the historicist interpretation of prophecy. We want to start with verse 1 of chapter 8, and it says here, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour." The seventh seal consists of 7 trumpets, which announce war and battle with great sound in the near future. Half an hour, even with the time interpretation of 1 day for 1 year, is a very, very short time. Peace did not last long after Constantine's government came to an end. God wanted to finish the judgment against Rome. Again, we see heaven in our context as the spiritual realm, and that overshadowed the rulers, governments of the empire, and not the dwelling place of God. "And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets." That's verse 2. In Numbers 10, verses 1 to 10, we read that Moses received the commandment from the Lord to blow the trumpets to assemble the people, to warn them of intruders, and to blow over the sacrifice. In the book of Joshua, we read about the walls of Jericho, which came tumbling down at the sound of the trumpets. Joshua chapter 6. Here we receive a similar warning from above. Get out of the way, children of God. War is coming. Verse 3, "And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne." In the Old Testament, it was the high priest that took hot coals from the altar to bring it daily before the curtain in the tabernacle. There he received a vessel with incense, which he burned before the Lord. The sweet smell filtered through the curtain into the presence of God, into the most holy place. In our verse, we experience the heavenly reality with Jesus, our high priest. He is forever present. Now, the prayers of the saints, inspired by the Holy Ghost, are a sweet savor and reach the heart of God. There is no longer a curtain between man and God. The way into the presence of God, into the throne room, is opened up through Jesus Christ. "How long still, Lord?" was the cry of the martyrs in the last chapter. Here we have much prayer offered by the saints to see them through the following trumpets. And then we come to verse 4. "And the smoke of the incense which came was the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand." The Bible teaches us that the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. The answer might not be the one which is preferred by us, but we can rest assured that it will be to our best advantage. We have an advocate in heaven who stands in for us day and night, and the results of these many prayers we see in the next verse. And verse 5 says, "And the angel took the censer, filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake." "There comes one after me," said John the Baptist. "He will baptize you with fire." Fire in the hand of God is almighty power and might. It can bring blessing or it can bring judgment. It warms on a cold winter's day, but it can also burn down the barn. In verse 5, it speaks of the fire of judgment in reaction to the prayers of the saints. The wrath of God is turned against all lawlessness. Hebrews tells us about a mountain that burns with fire. So does Exodus chapter 19 and verse 16. When God is confronted with sin, which is a trespass against the law of God, His wrath is kindled against the perpetrators. It is expressed in our verse through the symbols of lightning, thunder, and earthquake. And earthquakes, they represent also wars. Fire is the media of test, that which is matter against that which is eternal. All things that burn, unless it is of pure gold and of God. Everything else that's not of God is just like chaff and stubble. And then verse 6, and the 7 angels, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. Now, the angels make themselves ready and wait for the order to go ahead with the judgment. And patiently they stand to attention until they receive the signal from the captain of the heavenly hosts. The historians point to a time between 400 and 475 AD. The trumpets are ordering the destruction of the western part of the Roman Empire. And then we come to the first trumpet. Verse 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. At the time, the Roman Empire was divided already into 3 parts, basically. The western, the southern, and the eastern parts. Between 400 and 410 AD, the Gothic hordes under their leader Alaric moved against the empire from the northeast, including Spain and Italy. Now, hail in Europe always comes from the northeast. The verse shows that this judgment does not come from the earth, but rather from heaven, as a symbol of hell shows it to us. From the prophet Habakkuk, we learn that God can use one nation against another in judgment. Trees, pastures, and wheat fields were destroyed by fire and burned to the ground. Whole forests were put alight. The Gothic hordes left total destruction behind. These barbarians had no regard for anything. They destroyed whatever came across their path. Symbolically, trees also represent villages and communities. The green grass showed a peaceful atmosphere before the attacks. The half hour of silence was over. Hail mixed with blood. Alaric was bloodthirsty and was not satisfied with destroying the landscape only, but he killed man and beast and child and old people in his wake. That was the first trumpet and the first part of the judgment against Rome. Then the second trumpet, verses 8 to 9. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain, burning with fire, was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. A mountain, in symbolic language, means a nation. We read it from Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 2. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow onto it. In this verse, we meet the Vandals and their leader, Genseric, who was known as the tyrant of the sea. They were as a burning mountain cast into the sea. He is symbolically compared with Satan, who fell like lightning from heaven. The drama we see on the earthly stage is reflecting the evil spirits and their doing in high places. The Vandals were a seafaring nation in the Mediterranean region that plundered the towns and the villages along its shores. Even Rome was not spared, and they caused panic in the city for 12 days and nights, plundering whatever they found. In 439 AD, Carthage fell into their hands, and they made it their headquarters and the headquarters of piracy. Rome lost their supremacy in the Mediterranean, and their fleet was reduced considerably. Much blood flowed into the sea. The whole episode lasted from 425 to 470 AD. And then we come to the next trumpet, the third trumpet, verses 10 and 11. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters, and the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Attila the Hun was called the Scourge of God. Around 450 AD, Attila and his hordes began to move in from the east, pushing towards the Gothic tribes. They arrived first at the upper parts of the river Danube, then moved further along to the river Rhine. The battle at Chalons in 451 AD brought them to a halt towards the west, and they changed direction southward over the Alps into the valley of the river Po. All towns and villages were plundered along the way, and so also Milan. Rome paid immense sums of money to Attila to keep him from entering the city. The people lived in fear of their lives. He fell like a star from heaven onto the sources of the major rivers of Western Europe and made life bitter for the inhabitants. His hordes raped and murdered old and young without regards. We can still see the brush in the nations of Europe today that was left behind by Attila the Hun. Then the fourth trumpet, verse 12 and verse 13. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and night likewise. And I beheld and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet, of the three angels which are yet to sound. The time is 476 AD. Emperor Romulus Augustus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. The final blow came when Odoacer marched into Rome with the Heruli to make an end to all government. The mighty Iron Empire was smashed and cast into partial darkness. Sun, moon, stars, they fell from the political heaven and were extinguished. The whole ruling body fell apart. Verse 13 gives us a little insight into what was still to come with the next three trumpets. Woe, 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 it says there. It does not speak of better times to come. On the contrary, we have a dark, very dark future before us. Now the eastern part and the southern part of the Roman Empire had hardly any wounds to dress thus far. Until now, they have escaped the judgment that befell the western parts. The first four trumpets passed them by. But here also God needed to bring judgment, especially to the churches of the East, which went into idolatry by worshipping idols. This idolatry needed to be judged, and God reserved the fifth and the sixth trumpet for this purpose. The judgment against those who should know better is always more severe than that which is directed towards the totally ignorant masses. And then we come next time to chapter 9 and the fifth trumpet. But thus far, may God bless you. Think about the historic events. I know they are far, far in the distance and in the past, but you can read up history books and see how all these things have come to pass. Not just little tiny things, but massive, massive, massive judgments of God. Amen. So until next time. God bless.